You know, the Soul series got many things right, and some things wrong, but that's not a big deal because we can't all be perfect. And the reason why I brought this up is because I was thinking about what the next upcoming Souls game would be about, and what it should do and what it should avoid. And that led me to think about what each Souls game got right and what they got wrong. Look, I know what you might be thinking. This topic has been ran through to the ground and milked to death, and I can't possibly bring anything new to the table. And you're damn right, I'm gonna milk the hell out of this as well, with nothing new to add. Okay, but in all seriousness, while some of the points I'll be making is similar to others, there's gonna be some that's a bit different. So today I'll be going over about the things that each Souls game got right and what they got wrong. Demon Souls started it all, laying the foundation for the entire Souls series. Its innovative mechanics, haunting atmosphere, and challenging gameplay set the stage for the what's to come. However, as the first game in the series, it also has its fair share of rough edges. But before I get into those said rough edges, let's talk about what Demon Souls got right. The core mechanics. Demon Souls introduced many of the ideas that would define the series. The stamina-based combat system made every action feel deliberate, whether you were swinging a sword, blocking, or rolling to safety. The risk-reward mechanic of retrieving souls after dying added tension to every encounter, making failures sting but also give you a chance at redemption. The death and respawn loop was punishing yet fair, forcing players to learn and improve. These mechanics created a solid base that future games refined but never strayed too far from. Now, one of the things that Demon Souls got wrong was the lackluster bosses. While Demon Souls brought the concept of unique boss fights to life, many of these encounters lack the depth and challenge seen in later games. Most fights rely on gimmicks rather than skills, such as using the environment to defeat the dragon god or solving the puzzle of the fool's idol. Other bosses like the Adjudicator or Dirty Colossus are too simple and unmemorable. These shortcomings make the bosses feel less satisfying, especially for players who've experienced the more complex fights in the later games. Dark Souls took the foundation of Demon Souls and expanded on it, creating a masterpiece. Its world design, storytelling, and atmosphere set a new standard for action RPGs. However, some gameplay mechanics didn't land as smoothly, but what Dark Souls did get right though was the level design. The interconnected world of Dark Souls is one of its greatest achievements. Areas are thoughtfully designed to loop back into each other, creating moments of, "What the hell, I've been here before," when you unlock a new shortcut or find yourself back at Firelink Shrine. The world feels alive with every path leading somewhere meaningful. Exploring these intricate levels is rewarding as they're filled with secrets, shortcuts, and hidden treasures. The seamless transitions between areas make Lordran feel like a real, cohesive place, setting a benchmark for video game level design. Now unfortunately, Dark Souls stumbles in two key areas. First, the long run back to some bosses can be exhausting. After dying to a tough boss, having to repeat the same long trek through enemies can feel tedious, especially in fights like Ornstein and Smo or the Bed of Chaos. Second, the weapon upgrade system is unnecessarily complex. Figuring out how to upgrade a weapon with the right materials and paths can be confusing for new players, often requiring outside guides. While these issues don't ruin the experience, they make the game feel less polished in certain aspects. Dark Souls 2 is the black sheep of the series, but it still has a lot to offer. With its sprawling world, freedom of exploration, and tons of customization options, it carved out its own identity. However, some uneven design choices held it back a lot. Now what Dark Souls 2 did get right though is the world. Dark Souls 2 shines in how open and varied its world feels. The game offers players the freedom to tackle areas in nearly any order, creating a sense of choice that isn't as present in other entries. Each location has its own distinct theme, from the eerie majesty of Drangleic Castle to the haunting beauty of the Shrine of Amana. While the world isn't as interconnected as Lordran, it makes up for it with sheer size and variety. The lore adds to the sense of scale as well, with hints of the kingdom being in decline and ancient mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Something that I've always liked with Dark Souls 2's world is how brighter it is compared to 1. I loved how dark and gloomy the atmosphere was in the first game, but I personally liked how they changed it up a bit in 2, without making it seem too colorful. The only thing that held back the world design in Dark Souls 2 is the graphics. Now I'm not one to complain about graphics, but I don't know if it was just the lighting or the texture qualities itself, but if Dark Souls 2 had at least better lighting, the world would have stood out even more. Now unfortunately, Dark Souls 2 is plagued by questionable design choices. The enemy placement can feel unfair, with groups of enemies swarming you in tight spaces, making some encounters frustrating rather than challenging. The combat also feels slower and less responsive compared to Dark Souls 1 and 3. This sluggishness can make battles feel clunky, especially for players used to, the smoother gameplay of the other entries. These issues can take away from the immersion and make certain parts of the game feel like a chore rather than an adventure. Dark Souls 3 is a love letter to the fans of the series, blending the fast-paced combat of Bloodborne with the lore and world building of the original Dark Souls. The thing that Dark Souls 3 got right in my opinion was the bosses. Dark Souls 3 delivers some of the best boss fights in the series, from the dramatic showdown with the Abyss Watchers to the heart-pounding battle against the Nameless King. These encounters are intense, challenging, and rewarding. Each boss is visually striking with intricate designs and epic arenas that elevate the experience. The music also adds to the atmosphere, with amazing orchestral scores that makes every fight feel like a grand finale. The variety in mechanics and difficulty ensures that no two fights are the same, making the bosses a highlight of the game. Another good thing about the bosses in Dark Souls 3 is that there are barely any bad ones. Sure, you got a few of them here and there, but I could only count 3 of them that were not super good. And even then, if you compare them to some other bosses in the series, they're way better than them. The game also focused on quality over quantity, and that's why I think the bosses are so balanced and fun. Now, the only thing that Dark Souls 3 got wrong was the level design. And I won't even consider it wrong, as it was just the weakest part of the game. While the individual levels in Dark Souls 3 are beautifully crafted, the overall world design felt more linear than previous games. Areas are often isolated from one another, lacking the interconnectedness that made Dark Souls 1's world so memorable. This linearity makes the game feel more straightforward, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does lose some of the sense of discovery that defines the series. The levels themselves are still fun to explore, but they don't have the same lasting impression as Lordran or even Drang Lake. Bloodborne is a bold departure from the traditional Souls formula, emphasizing fast-paced combat and a gothic horror aesthetic. Its unique world and story earned it a dedicated fan base, but some aspects fell short of expectations. Now, the things that Bloodborne got right were the atmosphere, world, and combat. Bloodborne's atmosphere is unmatched, pulling players into a dark, twisted world inspired by Gothic and Lovecraftian horror. Yharnam feels alive from its eerie streets to its blood-soaked outskirts, creating an oppressive sense of dread. The story, filled with cryptic lore and themes of madness, draws players into its mysteries. On top of that, the combat is fast, aggressive, and incredibly satisfying. The rally mechanic, where players regain health by striking back quickly, encourages a more offensive playstyle, making every fight feel intense and rewarding. Bloodborne's world and gameplay combine to deliver an unforgettable experience. But despite its strengths, Bloodborne has its weak points. The Chalice dungeons, while a creative idea, felt repetitive and grindy, lacking the detail and variety of the main game's levels. And this wouldn't be an issue for me, as the Chalice dungeons are optional. However, in order to get some really good blood gems, which are items used to increase your weapon scaling even more, you have to farm them in these dungeons, which sucks. Additionally, some of the main game bosses are underwhelming compared to the best in the series. Fights like the Witch of Hemwick and Mikolash lack the intensity and fun factor Souls fans expect. While the Old Hunters introduces excellent bosses, the base game's lineup doesn't always deliver the same level of excitement. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple good bosses, but compared to the other Souls games' main games, the bosses were a bit, underwhelming. At least on subsequent playthroughs. Also, the fact that you have to farm heals was kind of a big miss in my opinion. Sekiro shifts away from RPG elements to focus on skill-based combat and a tightly crafted story. With its precise gameplay and beautiful design levels, it stands out as a unique entry in FromSoft's catalog. Now let's get the obvious out of the way. The best thing that Sekiro did right was its combat. Sekiro's combat is a masterclass in precision and timing. The focus on parries, posture breaking, and perfectly timed counters make every duel feel like a test of skill. Each boss fight becomes a dance of learning patterns and striking at the perfect moment, creating a sense of accomplishment that's hard to beat. The game's level design is also worth mentioning. With vertical exploration and stealth mechanics adding new layers to the experience, the world of Ashina feels alive, from its snow-covered mountaintops to its burning castles, blending beauty with chaos. But the combat is undeniably the greatest thing about the game. Now, while Sekiro's combat is incredible, it comes at the cost of variety. Players are locked into using the katana, which limits playstyles and experimentation. Unlike other Souls games, there's no room for creative builds or different approaches to combat. This restriction, while fitting for the game's focus, reduces replayability. Once you've mastered the katana, there's little to explore in terms of gameplay. Side note, that's why I want FromSoft to innovate on Sekiro's combat with one of their upcoming titles, because I think having multiple weapons could work, but maybe if it was like 3 or 4 categories. First, you have the basic katana, which is the most balanced, a short glaive-like weapon that focuses on reach, and Odachi, and dual wielding wakizashis that deal fast posture damage at the cost of doing less overall damage to enemies' health. But I'm just dreaming right now, as that would take a lot of work and balancing. Elden Ring took the Souls formula and expanded it into an open world format, giving players the freedom to explore at their own pace. Its scale and ambition are unmatched. It also worked on combining the best elements of the previous games and putting them all together. Now, the best thing that stood out to me the most about Elden Ring is the open world. Elden Ring's open world is breathtaking in its scope and design. The lands between is vast and full of secrets, with hidden dungeons, towering castles, and sprawling landscapes waiting to be discovered. Unlike many other open world games, it never felt empty or repetitive, as every area has unique enemies, lore, and challenges. The freedom to tackle the world in almost any order makes each player's journey feel personal and unique. The sense of wonder and discovery is at the heart of Elden Ring's success, making it a standout in the Souls series. However, the thing that Elden Ring got wrong was with some of the bosses. Look, I know I've been bitching about this for the past year now, but damn it, I'm still standing on it. While the bosses in Elden Ring are visually stunning and mechanically interesting, some suffer from poor design choices. A few bosses, especially late game ones, have overly aggressive attack patterns with few safe openings to strike. This can make certain fights feel frustrating rather than fair, as it can be a struggle to find opportunities to deal damage. While not all bosses share this issue, it's noticeably enough to detract from the otherwise excellent combat experience. So those were the things each Souls game got right and what they got wrong. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like and subscribe. Also, check out my Patreon if you want to support me even more. And if you don't, then that's fine by me. And speaking of Patreon, shout out to my Patreon members, Jabroni Jones, Mac, and Daniel Scotland. Thank you guys for the support, and thanks to those who watched this video.